successful and a holding against at all times.
Be careful.
Government officials insist that this is an isolated incident of the packet for anyone. But then, known as perhaps, we will continue to keep you informed of this story.
November 12th, 1966. It was an ordinary Saturday afternoon in Clendenin, West Virginia. A crisp wind rolled through the hills as the last of the autumn leaves clung stubbornly to the trees. That day, 5 men stood in a quiet cemetery on the edge of town. The smell of damp earth filled the air as their boots sunk into the soft ground as they worked tirelessly. Shovels rising and falling in a steady rhythm, slicing through the soil, dirt piling beside the open grave. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows between the gravestones. All was as usual until the silence came. One of the men, mid-swing, looked up and froze. A strange feeling crawled up his spine.
I feel like somebody's watching us. Man, hurry up and dig so we can get out of here.
But he was right. Something was watching them. He wiped his brow and scanned the trees beyond the clearing. The branches stood still, defiant against the autumn breeze. But then, his breath caught in his throat. There, perched high in the tree line, a figure. Dark, motionless. Not a hawk, not a vulture, he thought. Bigger, much bigger. It had the shape of a man, but it was all wrong.
Man, I thought I told you to get back to work. What in the world?
One of the other men followed his gaze and froze as well. Before they knew it, all 5 shovels and jaws dropped. Their eyes widened as they stared terrified at this mysterious creature staring at them. All of them gripped in fear by the glowing red eyes locked upon them in the distance, boring holes through their very souls. It was as though time stopped until it moved. The beast spread out its huge, unnatural-looking dark wings. For one unbearable moment, it takes all the strength in the gravediggers not to fall over into the hole they just dug. Then it leapt into the air. With a single powerful motion, the creature took to the sky, swooping low over their heads. Its shadow passed over them, swift and silent, blocking out the pale afternoon sun before vanishing beyond the trees. No sound but the rustling of leaves and the frantic beating of their own hearts. The men ditched the gear and ran. It didn't end there. No, it was only getting started. The gravediggers were far from the last ones to see it. This otherworldly creature would visit Point Pleasant again 3 days later. It's now November 15th, 1966, just before midnight. The road outside Point Pleasant was dark and empty, save for the distant hum of crickets and the occasional rustling of wind through the trees. It all lay swallowed up by the thick woods surrounding the old TNT area. This was an old, crumbling, abandoned World War II munitions plant left to decay in the woods outside of town. It had been a popular lover's lane, but it also drew out those who wished to explore, to hunt, and many even to drag race. Inside their car, Roger and Linda Scarberry and their friends Steve and Mary Millette were driving around this isolated hangout spot, the radio playing softly as their tires hummed over cracked pavement. As the car rounded a curve near the old power plant, Linda suddenly screamed. Shocked, Roger slammed the brakes. There, just beyond the headlights, it stood. It was about 7 feet tall, wings folded against its back. The creature's body was grayish-brown, humanoid but definitely not human. And its eyes were glowing, burning red, fixed upon them, piercing the darkness. Roger didn't wait. He threw the car into reverse, tires screeching as they sped away. But before relief could settle in, Linda turned, her voice breaking into a terrified whisper.
It's following us.
Roger's foot slammed the gas. The speedometer climbed 60, 70, 80. well into triple digits, but it wasn't enough. It was keeping pace with them. The thing wasn't running, it wasn't flapping its wings, it was just gliding effortlessly. It followed their car as they sped down Route 62, those red eyes like bike reflectors, never blinking, never breaking their gaze. They all said they could hear a high-pitched screeching noise as it pursued them. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. It chased them for several miles before suddenly veering off and inexplicably disappearing. The couples weren't taking any chances. They didn't stop driving until they reached town. Once they arrived, they ran straight to the Mason County Sheriff's Office, their voices shaking as they recount the event they just endured. Sheriff George Johnson, noting the genuine terror in their voices, took their accounts very serious. Deputy Millard Halstead also said that the witnesses were visibly shaken. He truly believed they saw something, even if he wasn't sure quite what it was. The most troubling details were the glaring red eyes that they still felt staring at them from the darkness, and the high-pitched, metallic screeching noises resonating past their ears and into their hearts. The sheriff and his deputies went to investigate the old TNT area but found nothing except strange, static interference on their radios. The next evening, another group of people said they saw the same creature near the old TNT area. The next day, another sighting came in, then another, and another. Word was spreading quickly and newspapers were fanning the flames of gossip throughout town. The first newspapers to report the encounter were the Point Pleasant Register and the Charleston Gazette-Mail. They wanted a catchy name for the creature, and comic books were extremely popular in 1966. Someone, perhaps one of the editors or journalists, no one knows for sure, compared the creature's wings and humanoid form to the hero Batman. But instead of a bat, they called it Mothman. Within a year, some say that over 100 people throughout Point Pleasant claim to have seen the creature that they were now calling Mothman. But that first harrowing night, Linda Scarberry said she believed Mothman followed her home. She and Roger both claimed to have seen its red eyes peering into their windows on multiple occasions. The Mothman had come to Point Pleasant, and something was coming with him. Welcome back to The Dancing Toaster. My name is Nellie. The Dancing Toaster is a podcast that wrestles with the intersection of faith and the paranormal. I want to thank you for coming, or thank you for coming back. We are now 5 episodes into our series that's on creatures and cryptids, and my friends, today is a big one. The Mothman of Point Pleasant. I gotta admit, I'm a little nervous. I really enjoyed starting with lesser-known cryptids. A lot harder to get in trouble that way. When you get into the famous ones, you bring out all the experts. I'm getting prepared for the comments and reviews that clap back with, "Well, actually." I'm not an expert. I never claim to be. I'm just a passionate enthusiast of the supernatural, weird, and wonderful. I just got done last week sharing that with some new friends over at the Unrefined podcast. Last week, I had the privilege of being a guest on their show. Be on the lookout for that and go check them out. I want to issue a huge thank you to those guys over there. I had an amazing time. And another thank you for those jumping onto the Patreon. You are incredible, and to show how much I love you, I'm finally giving y'all some exclusives. Remember, at the end of February launches the Man-Eating Toaster, a brand new show only for my patrons where, in Dancing Toaster fashion, we're going to cover some scarier, more serious topics, cults and crimey stuff. We're going to be coming out swinging. The first episode of the Man-Eating Toaster will cover Heaven's Gate. They are that infamous UFO cult from the 90s with that really creepy leader who had that terrifying wide-eyed stare named Marshall Applewhite. Been getting some great feedback and encouragement, lots of people stoked for the new stuff. If you don't want to miss out, head over to the Patreon. $5 a month helps support my work and get you access to the new show. And another surprise, it'll get you early access to the merch. I'm working with somebody now to get merch out, something I've had a ton of requests for, something I can't wait to do for you. Lord willing, we'll finally see some in March, and my patrons will get first dibs on any merch I get, so stay tuned for that. Enough bookkeeping. Like I said before, I don't claim to be an expert of anything. I love learning, I love growing, I love going on these journeys and deep dives with you. And I don't think we've covered a topic yet that can be fully covered in an hour, least of all this one, the Mothman. He's famous, folks. So much has been said about this creature, and even more has been speculated upon. There's no end to the theories about what he is exactly, so today we'll be scratching the surface. For the first theory, and the most quote-unquote logical one, we'll turn to our first guest. Hello, Dr. Wright. Welcome to the show. How do you say your name? Is it, Al B. Wright?
Actually, it's Dr. Alistair Bernard Wright, but you can call me Dr. I'll Be Right.
Ah, yes, Dr. I'll Be Right. So, Doctor, what is the most prominent mainstream opinion about the Mothman?
Well, Nellie, everyone knows that the Mothman was just a sandhill crane.
But Doctor, last I checked, the sandhill crane averages 4 feet tall with an approximate wingspan of 7 feet. The witnesses say Mothman was over 7 feet tall with a wingspan of over 10 feet.
Oh, come on now. You really gonna split some hairs over a few feet? Ever heard of perceptual distortion? When people see something unexpected, especially at night, their brains will fill in the gaps. A scared witness in the dark, of course they're gonna exaggerate the size. And let's talk about wingspans. You really think the average person in a state of panic is out there with a measuring tape? Come on, man. Besides, the sandhill crane can extend its neck, making it seem taller than it is. Add a little bit of fear, some car headlights reflecting off those big glowing eyes, and suddenly, oh no, it's a monster. I mean, let's be real. If Mothman were actually a giant flying humanoid, don't you think we'd have some physical evidence by now? Instead, all we have is eyewitness hysteria and a whole lot of imagination.
Now hold on, Dr. Wright. I can see you already patting yourself on the back for a brilliant debunking, but let me get this straight. You're telling me that several terrified witnesses in the dark, panicking, somehow overestimated the height of 3 feet and a wingspan by 4? By your logic, anytime someone gets scared, their depth perception just short circuits and suddenly a goose is a griffin. Tell me, Dr. Wright, when was the last time you saw a pigeon and thought it was a pterodactyl? Let's talk about your brain fills in the gaps argument, because last I checked, that works both ways. If someone is expecting a bird, their brain is going to interpret it as a bird. If someone is expecting nothing, their brain is going to ignore it and see nothing. But what we have here is multiple independent witnesses who all describe the exact same massive humanoid figure with wings and glowing red eyes, something they had no reference point for. One witness might exaggerate, but dozens of people describing the same thing? That's not so easy to dismiss. And by the way, the whole "where's the physical evidence?" just because something doesn't leave a footprint doesn't mean it wasn't there. You know who else leaves no physical evidence? Shadows, echoes, and things that aren't supposed to exist. If Mothman was just Big Bird, why did it chase a car at 100 miles per hour without flapping its wings? And with humanoid and man-like being thrown around, I've never seen a crane and thought, wow, that's really close to a person.
But it was in the dark. They suffered from the flash perception effect. When you see something briefly, especially in low light, your brain fills in the gaps based on context and expectations. If these witnesses expected danger, their minds may have amplified the size and features of the creature. Not to mention motion parallax. When you're moving at high speeds, objects closer to you appear to move faster, while distant objects move more slowly. This can make fast-moving objects appear much larger or closer than they really are.
That's all good and well, Doctor, but the gravediggers saw it during the daytime, not at night, and not from a moving vehicle. They were all standing still in the cemetery. And none of what you suggested explains how the creature could have pursued them into triple-digit speeds.
Yeah, let's pump the brakes on that one. First of all, have you ever heard of an optical illusion? When you're speeding down a dark road at night, your perception of objects shifts. A bird flying alongside you at a much slower speed might appear to be keeping up. And I'd love to see a speed radar report on Mothman. Did they have a cop clock it at exactly 100 miles per hour? Or were they just, panicking? Because last I checked, panic doesn't exactly make you a reliable eyewitness. Sounds more like a case of adrenaline-fueled exaggeration to me.
No, they didn't clock the Mothman, but they knew how to read a speedometer. A sandhill crane maxes out at 25 miles an hour? Even if it caught a good updraft, we're still talking about maybe 50 miles per hour max. You expect me to believe a natural bird just casually paced a car doing 100 miles an hour? On top of that, this gliding crane wasn't just keeping up, it was chasing them, they said. That means it was actively pursuing, not just catching a breeze. Unless you're telling me a sandhill crane had a personal vendetta against a 57 Chevy.
All right, fine. Maybe it wasn't a sandhill crane. Maybe it was an owl. Think about it. Glowing red eyes? Check. Silent flight? Check. Wings? Check. We're not talking about a monster here. We're talking about nature doing its thing. People see something weird, their brains panic, and suddenly a big owl turns into some demonic moth monster. Let's be real. If Mothman was real, wouldn't we have more than just stories? No bones, no feathers, no weird footprints. But an owl, we got plenty of those.
Really, Doctor? How many 7-foot owls have you ever seen? Silent flight, sure, but not at those speeds, not on its best day. And remember, the witnesses didn't just see something take off from a tree. They saw a tall, humanoid figure standing in the middle of the road, and then it launched into the air. You still haven't answered the issue of aggression.
Oh, so now we're calling it aggressive. Look, just because something flies near you doesn't mean it's trying to eat your face. Let's say for the sake of argument it wasn't a sandhill crane or an owl. Maybe it was just a big territorial bird. Animals react to threats all the time. Maybe Mothman, if you really insist on calling it that, wasn't hunting anything down. Maybe it was startled and just happened to fly in the same direction as the car. You ever seen a goose get aggressive when you get too close to its nest? Maybe these people just wandered into its turf and it wasn't happy about that. And let's not forget headlights disorient birds at night. Maybe the car's lights mess with its vision, so instead of attacking, it was just confused and followed the vehicle until it figured out where it was going. So no, I don't think we have a bloodthirsty supernatural winged demon hunting people down. I think we got a case of, oops, I flew the wrong way and I'm a bird.
Dr. Wright, listen to yourself. Witnesses didn't say Mothman just hovered around looking confused. They said it pursued them. 4 people said it pursued them in the car. Let's talk about body language. Animals that are confused don't chase things for miles. They don't lunge toward moving cars like they're trying to rip the roof off. And they definitely don't stalk entire towns for over a year afterward. But I will say, you offered some very interesting perspectives. Though I don't agree with the purely natural explanation, let's discuss the unnatural natural explanation.
What on earth are you talking about?
One of the more grounded yet eerie theories about Mothman suggests that it was not supernatural, but rather a mutated natural creature, something born from chemical contamination in the TNT area of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. This theory stems from the fact that the TNT area, where many of the Mothman sightings occurred, was a former World War II munitions plant. An area known to contain abandoned storage bunkers, underground tunnels, and possibly toxic waste leaks. During World War II, the U.S. government constructed the West Virginia Ordnance Works just outside of Point Pleasant, a facility dedicated to manufacturing explosives, gunpowder, and other wartime materials. The area housed dozens of storage bunkers known as igloos, where TNT and hazardous chemicals were being stored. As we've noted, after the war, the facility was abandoned, allowing nature to slowly reclaim the site. However, the site was never properly cleaned up before being repurposed as part of the McClintock Wildlife Management Area, leading to reports of chemical leaks seeping into the soil and into the water over the years. Some believe that prolonged exposure to some of these hazardous materials may have led to mutated wildlife, possibly explaining the origin of a deformed, oversized creature, one we now call Mothman. One hypothesis is that Mothman wasn't an unknown cryptid, but an animal that had been grotesquely altered by the chemicals in the TNT area. Now, some candidates include a mutated owl. If exposed to radiation or toxic waste, an owl might develop overgrown wings, abnormal glowing eyes, or distorted proportions. A mutated bat has been proposed. Bats already have leathery wings, semi-humanoid appearance. A chemical mutation could have increased its size and made it more aggressive. A giant deformed turkey vulture has also been proposed. Vultures have bald heads and large wingspans, but could exposure to chemicals cause unnatural feather loss, elongated limbs, or glowing eyes?
Look, I'm not crazy about these, but they're far more reasonable than some of the other stuff you say.
Well, we're not done.
Of course we're not.
One of my favorites of all is the possibility that Mothman was a failed government experiment. Some believe the government was testing genetic mutations in the TNT area, possibly mixing human and animal DNA. If Mothman was a mutated creature, this might explain why the government quickly shut down certain parts of the TNT area, why Men in Black showed up after the Mothman sightings. Yep, those Men in Black, don't worry, Season 3 is when we're going to talk more about them. And perhaps why no physical evidence, bones, feathers, DNA, what have you, has ever been found. Some people believe the government knew about strange mutations in the area and tried to suppress these reports. Some suggest toxic contamination caused something unnatural, and the government swooped in and cleaned up the evidence, even going as far as witness intimidation and attempts to discredit witnesses to prevent panic. Some like to go a little further and a little darker. The darkest of the mutation theories suggest that Mothman wasn't an animal-human hybrid at all, but rather a human-animal hybrid who had been altered by toxic exposure or worse. Could a former factory worker have been exposed to experimental chemicals and mutated? Did someone living near the site slowly transform into something unnatural? Or Or did the government create a hybrid being that escaped from the facility?
Would you stop trying to audition for X-Files, Mr. Fox Mulder? They canceled that show again.
While some of this might sound like something out of the X-Files, we know that the US government conducted secret human experimentation in the mid-20th century. You think it's bad what Doge has been finding out recently, you ain't heard nothing yet. The US government conducted numerous secret human experiments, often involving radiation, chemical exposure, biological warfare, and even mind control. And this is not some kooky conspiracy theory. We know about them because many of these programs were later declassified, revealing deeply unethical and dangerous experiments conducted without consent on American citizens, prisoners, military personnel, and marginalized communities. The most famous of these went from the 1950s to the 1970s, when it supposedly stopped. Project MKUltra revolved around mind control and experimentation using LSD. It was run by perhaps the most awful of our three-letter organizations, the CIA. It was a top-secret program designed to study mind control, interrogation techniques, and psychological warfare. Researchers dosed unsuspecting people with LSD, hypnosis, and electroshock therapy to see if they could be brainwashed or mentally manipulated. Victims included prisoners, military members, psychiatric patients, and random civilians. Many subjects had their memories erased, suffered permanent psychological damage, and some even died as a result of these experiments. As if this wasn't bad enough, let's go on to the Tuskegee syphilis experiment that went on even longer, from 1932 to about 1972. What did the government do then? Well, they intentionally and secretly infected over 600 black men with syphilis. You heard that right. The U.S. Public Health Service secretly conducted a 40-year-long study on 600 black men in Tuskegee, Alabama, to observe the effects of untreated syphilis. The men were never told they had syphilis, nor were they given treatment, even when penicillin became widely available in the 1940s. Many of these poor souls died slow, painful deaths. They unknowingly infected their wives, sadly even passed syphilis to some of their children, all the while believing they were receiving free medical care. It's been said you either know history or you trust the government, because you can't do both. We're not even done yet, though. I really want to drive this point home. In 1950, there was the infamous Operation Sea Spray. During this sick, psychotic operation, they secretly conducted biological warfare on U.S. citizens. The U.S. Navy secretly sprayed the city of San Francisco with a bacteria called Serratia marcescens. It's a rod-shaped bacterium often found in hospitals and water supplies, known for producing a reddish pigment and being resistant to antibiotics. They did this to simulate a biological warfare attack. Thousands of U.S. citizens were secretly exposed to the bacteria. Many of them developed serious infections with at least one confirmed death. The public was never made aware, and similar tests were conducted in New York, Florida, and in Washington, D.C.
But they did the experiments trying to help and protect people in the long run.
No. It was sick, it was illegal, and it was unethical. The ends do not always justify the means. You find out about the Tuskegee experiments and Operation Sea Spray, and I hope it forces you to see what happened in 2020 maybe a little bit differently. But what do I know? I'm just a silly paranormal podcasting pastor. Let's get into the nuclear stuff. Throughout the 40s and 60s, there were the atomic soldier experiments. This is when the U.S. military purposely exposed its own troops to nuclear bombs. Now, they weren't blowing them up, but the U.S. military used its own men as test subjects for nuclear radiation exposure. Tens of thousands of troops were forced to stand near nuclear bomb test sites, sometimes with no protection at all. Soldiers suffered radiation sickness, cancer, burns, and genetic defects, but the government denied responsibility for this for decades. Some of the parties involved have tried to defend this immoral experimentation, saying trite things like, they knew what they signed up for when they joined the military. Which is just makes me so mad. Just because they signed up to serve their country didn't give anyone the right to treat them as guinea pigs or lab rats. That idiotic response falls flat when you find out about the Cold War radiation experiments that were done at the same time between the 40s and 60s, where they were dosing unknowing civilians with radiation. The U.S. Atomic Energy Commission conducted secret experiments by injecting unwitting hospital patients with plutonium and uranium to study radiation effects on humans. Many victims were terminally ill patients, pregnant women, and children who were never told they were being experimented upon. Some were exposed to high levels of radiation in underground bunkers to see how long humans could survive before suffering lethal effects. So miss me with that nonsense of, they knew what they signed up for. These people sure didn't.
The government would never.
But they have. Time and time again, they have. And this is just the stuff we know about now. What info is going to come out 70 to 80 years from now when I'm dead and gone and they tell us about what was done the last 5 years? I don't think I poo-pooed enough on the CIA. Let's go back to the 1950s when they conducted a really spicy, immoral experiment by the name of Operation Midnight Climax. I'm gonna try and keep it safe for the kiddies, but as part of the infamous MK Ultra project, the CIA ran secret brothels in San Francisco and New York, where unsuspecting men were lured in, drugged with LSD, and then observed through one-way mirrors. The CIA wanted to see if LSD could be used to control people's minds, but the test subjects were left psychologically shattered, unaware they had been part of any experiment.
Are you done yet? What's this got to do with Mothman?
Notice the dates. The US government was actively running these 6 secret human and biological experiments during the same era as the Mothman sightings during the 1960s. So again, saying ignorant things like,
But the government wouldn't do that.
well, they have. What have they done that we don't know about yet? Don't think for a second that all the skeletons are out of their closet yet. If the TNT area outside of Point Pleasant was a toxic waste site, it's possible that some form of chemical, genetic, or radiation experimentation may have occurred there or somewhere nearby. The Men in Black sightings around Mothman reports could further suggest government agents trying to cover something up in the area. Could Mothman have been a failed experiment? A mutated human or hybrid creature that escaped?
Oh boy, here we go. So now we're taking every bad thing the government ever did and somehow tying it to Mothman. What are you going to expect me to believe next? Mothman took out JFK? Look, I ain't saying the government has a perfect track record. Yes, MK Ultra happened. Yes, Tuskegee happened. Yes, Operation Sea Spray, it happened. But guess what? Those were real documented programs. There's actual declassified evidence. Meanwhile, you're over here saying maybe Mothman was a mutant government experiment. Based on what exactly? A bunch of scary, horny teenagers driving through an old military dump? I mean, you're throwing out all these horrific, verifiable experiments, which by the way, I agree were awful, but then you're slipping in your cryptid theory like it's equally factual. That's classic bait and switch, man.
Okay, doctor, let's dissect this like one of your logical breakdowns. You agree the government ran secret experiments on its own people for decades. You agree they were dangerous, unethical, and covered up for years. So let me ask you, what's the cutoff? What's the cutoff point for the government secrecy? At what point did they say to themselves, you know what, let's stop doing the creepy illegal science and play fair from now on? Was it in the 70s? Was it the 80s? Was it last week? Because history says it never stopped, and the Bible shows us that it never will. I'm not saying this is what Mothman is or was, but I refuse to let people throw it out entirely as just silly because what we know about the government is dark, and what we still don't know, I'm sure, is much darker.
Well, nobody's mixing animals, and they're certainly not mixing humans and animals.
What? We talked about this on multiple occasions as early as episode 1 of this season. I feel it bears repeating now. Human-animal chimeric experiments already exist. Researchers have developed chimeric embryos that combine human cells with animal embryos like pigs or sheep in order to study organ growth and potentially grow human-compatible organs for transplant. There are also mouse-human chimeras, the mice I mentioned with human cells that are used in some medical research to study human disease and drug responses. This ventures well into more questionable territory in my opinion, not so much the mice but the embryonic stuff for sure. But we ain't done. Remember the transgenic animals? No, not a bull in a blue state thinking it's a heifer. No, rather they are organisms that have been genetically modified to carry genes from another animal entirely. I proved last time that yes, they do exist. I talked about the glowfish, which are genetically modified fish that glow due to jellyfish or coral genetic material being introduced. But the even creepier ones were the spider goats. Spider goats are the goats that have been genetically engineered to produce spider silk proteins within their milk. The substance is extracted and used to create ultra-strong fibers substantially faster than the spiders can do it. And a few times we've discussed the advent of CRISPR technology, the tech that allows for gene-edited organisms. With this technology, scientists can directly modify the DNA of an organism to introduce traits from other species without traditional hybridization methods. I told you they've already genetically edited some pigs to be compatible with human organ transplants, among other things. If this is the stuff we've been allowed to know about, what have companies and governments been doing that we don't know about? Or do you mean to tell me that all of these corporations and governments are all totally moral and legitimate and on the up and up? I don't think that the Mothman of Point Pleasant was a failed experiment from the 1960s. But you know what? If another Mothman-type creature popped up in the modern day, I would most certainly consider it. I wouldn't rule it out. But I think we've run this one into the ground for now.
Thank goodness.
Don't worry though, in a separate future episode we'll talk more about the Men in Black as well as the MK Ultra stuff. Now what else might the infamous creature be? For many, Mothman wasn't just a cryptid, but a harbinger of disaster due to the event that took place on December 15th, 1967. The Silver Bridge stretched across the Ohio River connecting Point Pleasant, West Virginia to Gallipolis, Ohio. For years it had stood as a steel lifeline between the two towns, a sturdy, dependable structure that thousands of people crossed every single day. But on the evening of December 15th, 1967, during rush hour, the bridge held something else. A terrible, unseen weight. It was incredibly cold that day. Just a couple of weeks before Christmas, the streets were lined with holiday shoppers. Families loaded up their cars with gifts, groceries, and decorations. By 5 p.m., traffic on the Silver Bridge was backed up. The bridge wasn't built for modern vehicles. It had originally opened in 1928, long before heavy semi-trucks and the increased weight of modern cars. The suspension cables groaned under the strain of rush hour congestion. The first sign of disaster was subtle, that no one noticed at first. A single eye-bar, a crucial piece of steel holding the bridge's structure together, suddenly snapped. Not with a loud bang, no explosion, no dramatic warning, just a quiet fracture in the cold, aging metal. A hairline crack, just 1/10 of an inch deep, had been lurking inside the eye-bar for years, waiting for just the right moment. That evening, sadly, that moment had come. The crack expanded rapidly, splitting through one of the bridge's main suspension chains, which, unlike most modern bridges, had no redundancy system, meaning once one part failed, the entire structure was doomed. The snap was like a gunshot echoing across the river. Then, the unthinkable. Witnesses later described a horrific, slow-motion scene unfolding before their eyes. The steel trusses twisted violently, pulling downward with a force no human engineering could resist. Cars, trucks, and buses lurched forward as if the road beneath them suddenly tilted, as if the entire world had been upended. Then came the roar. An avalanche of metal and concrete plunged into the freezing waters below, taking many human lives with it. For some, it was instant. Cars vanished beneath the surface before anyone inside could react. For others, for the unlucky ones who had seconds to realize what was happening, it was a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. They screamed, they clawed at their windows, pounded on their windows as the Ohio River swallowed them whole. Witnesses on the riverbank stood frozen in shock, their screams lost in deafening collapse. Within minutes, the river was filled with wreckage, oil, and bodies. Rescue boats arrived as quickly as they could, but for many it was too late. 46 people lost their lives that night, some trapped in their vehicles at the bottom of the Ohio River, others drowning in the frigid current. Even some who survived the initial fall later died of hypothermia before rescuers could reach them. It wasn't long before the rumors began. The bridge collapse was ruled a structural failure, blamed on a tiny, unseen crack in an eye-bar, but the people of Point Pleasant weren't so sure. In the days leading up to the disaster, there had been strange phone calls, flickering lights, static on the radios, and most unsettling of all, dozens of people claimed to have seen something. Something with wings flying around Point Pleasant. Something with large, glowing red eyes. A dark figure had been spotted perched on the bridge just days before it fell, silently watching. Some believed Mothman wasn't just a cryptid, but a warning. Had it tried to tell them? Was it an omen of death, or was it something even darker? Perhaps not intending to warn them of disaster, but perhaps causing it. These are questions still asked by the people of Point Pleasant to this day. Now let me be clear, the official cause of the Silver Bridge collapse was indeed structural failure. That's not up for debate. But the fact that Mothman sightings surged prior to the disaster, the fact that witnesses swore they saw it on the bridge itself, that's where things get, well, strange. For those who would attempt to accuse me of being insensitive talking about a cryptid in connection with a real-world tragedy, chill out and don't shoot the messenger. I'm not the first, and I certainly won't be the last. I didn't come up with the idea. This is a question that has been seriously asked for decades. A lot of strange activity was occurring in Point Pleasant at the time, and who can blame them for thinking that some of it might have been connected? Is it that outlandish to ask the question if the strange, unsettling, and unprecedented encounters with a dark, unknown figure may be connected to the unsettling and unprecedented event that occurred that December? This series of events have led some over the years to conclude that perhaps Mothman was a warning, a harbinger of doom.
Why Point Pleasant? Why then? How come we don't have Mothman popping up everywhere every time a tragedy is about to happen?
Now that's a fair question. What if I said that in some cases there may have been? On April 26, 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Pripyat, Ukraine, then part of the Soviet Union, had experienced a catastrophic explosion in reactor number 4, resulting in the worst nuclear disaster in history. The explosion released deadly radiation that spread across Europe, leading to the forced evacuation of Pripyat and surrounding areas. Thousands of people suffered long-term health effects due to radiation exposure. To this day, Chernobyl remains one of the most radioactive locations on the planet. In the years following the disaster, a chilling legend emerged, one that drew eerie parallels to the Mothman of Point Pleasant. According to some accounts, workers at the Chernobyl plant allegedly saw a large, black, winged creature with glowing red eyes hovering near Reactor 4 in the days leading up to the explosion. Witnesses described it as terrifying, an unnatural being which later became known as the Blackbird of Chernobyl. Some survivors also claimed to have experienced vivid nightmares about the creature and even received strange, untraceable phone calls before the disaster, similar to the strange phenomena reported by Mothman witnesses in West Virginia 2 decades earlier. Despite the chilling similarities, there are no contemporary Soviet reports confirming the existence of the creature, and the story only surfaced years later through retellings in paranormal circles. However, the description of the entity, a winged humanoid with glowing red eyes, is strikingly similar to Mothman, leading some to speculate that it was the same being, or one like it, appearing before a catastrophic event. In the previous year, on September 19, 1985, a devastating 8.0 magnitude earthquake struck Mexico City, reducing countless buildings to rubble and causing the deaths of between 10,000 and 40,000 people. The disaster remains one of the deadliest earthquakes in modern history, leaving behind widespread destruction and a lingering sense of tragedy. In the aftermath, an eerie legend emerged, suggesting that Mothman or a similar winged humanoid was seen in the skies above Mexico City in the days leading up to the quake. Witnesses described a dark, silent figure hovering over buildings, an ominous presence that in hindsight seemed to foreshadow the impending catastrophe. Some accounts claim that Mexican newspapers reported these sightings, though no archived articles have been found to verify this claim. Additionally, if Mothman had truly appeared in Mexico City, why were there no follow-up sightings in the country after the earthquake? With the lack of contemporary reports, the Mexico City Mothman remains an intriguing but unverified mystery, blending elements of folklore and urban legend. Were these phenomena limited to their time, the 60s to the 80s? No, actually. On August 1st, 2007, tragedy struck in Minneapolis, Minnesota, when the I-35 West Bridge over the Mississippi River suddenly collapsed, also during rush hour, sending cars and people plunging into the depths below. This disaster resulted in 13 deaths and over 145 injuries, shocking the nation. Investigators later determined that the collapse was caused by a design flaw in the bridge's gusset plates, which failed under the weight of heavy traffic and construction materials. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, several Minneapolis residents allegedly reported sightings of a winged humanoid near the bridge. Some described the figure as having burning red eyes and a massive wingspan, eerily reminiscent of the Mothman sightings of Point Pleasant before the 1967 Silver Bridge collapse. However, unlike the Silver Bridge disaster where Mothman was already part of local folklore before the event, no known reports of a Mothman-like entity existed in Minneapolis prior to this collapse. These claims only surfaced online afterward, and major news outlets never covered the alleged sightings. With no photographic or video evidence, some say the Minnesota Mothman connection remains speculative at best. We'll consider one more tragedy that is really a multifaceted disaster that unfolded in Japan. On March 11, 2011, a catastrophic 9.0 magnitude earthquake struck off the coast of Japan, triggering a massive tsunami that devastated coastal areas and led to the meltdown of the Fukushima Daiichi power plant. This disaster claimed the lives of almost 16,000 people, with countless others affected by radiation exposure. It became the worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl in 1986, leaving a lasting impact on both Japan and the rest of the world. While no Japanese media or official reports ever mentioned a Mothman figure, some researchers abroad claim that a winged humanoid was seen near the Fukushima plant prior to the meltdown. These claims bear a striking resemblance to the Blackbird of Chernobyl legend, leading some to speculate that a Mothman figure may have once again appeared as a warning of impending catastrophe. However, there are no verified eyewitness accounts from Fukushima itself. And with no local reports or photographic evidence, the Fukushima Mothman connection will forever remain a mystery.
Oh, so now it's not just West Virginia, huh? Mothman's apparently a frequent flyer on the Disaster Express. Chernobyl, Mexico, Minneapolis, Japan. Where does he find the time? Look, I'll give you this. You've done your homework, but let's take a step back and apply a little something I like to call critical thinking. First off, Chernobyl. You're telling me that before the worst nuclear disaster in history, Soviet scientists who were obsessed with control and documentation just forgot to write down reports of a giant flying horror flapping around the power plant? The KGB covered up a lot of things, but a winged demon flying over reactor number 4 ain't one of them. If that had actually been seen, it would have been documented, suppressed, and classified faster than you can say glasnost. Then we have Mexico City. This one's even shakier. No archived newspaper articles, no contemporary reports, just vague, some people say they saw something stories. My guy, Mexico has plenty of folklore creatures, La Llorona, El Chupacabra, El Cadejo. So how do we know this wasn't just some local legend getting mixed up in the aftermath? Then there's Minneapolis. You're telling me that in the age of camera phones, internet forums, and news outlets desperate for clickbait headlines, not a single person snapped a picture of this alleged Mothman? Not one blurry shot or shaky video? And Japan, Fukushima, you're trying to tell me Mothman suddenly learned Japanese and decided to warn them too? Again, no contemporary reports, just Westerners trying to connect the dots years later, probably after reading too much Mothman prophecies at 2 a.m. with the lights off. So what we actually have here is a classic case of retroactive myth-making. People love a pattern, so when something tragic happens, they look back and go, oh wait, maybe that weird thing I saw means something. It's hindsight bias wrapped up with confirmation bias stirred with a pinch of creepypasta. So no, I don't think a Mothman is out here running a tragedy tour across the globe.
Whoa, that was savage, Dr. Wright, but let's push back a little bit, first with Chernobyl. You're saying the Soviet Union would have totally documented the Blackbird of Chernobyl? The same Soviet Union that denied Chernobyl was even dangerous until people were literally melting from radiation exposure? Yeah, because they were super into transparency. The KGB didn't forget to write it down, they made sure no one did. Not to mention, the atheist Soviet Union was officially anti-supernatural in every way possible, worse than you, Doctor. Their government actively suppressed religion, mysticism, and paranormal beliefs of all kinds. So even if there was evidence of the supernatural or paranormal, they would have denied it and suppressed it because it challenged their naturalistic, materialistic mindset. Now concerning Mexico, you're right about them having plenty of folklore creatures, but that doesn't mean a Mothman-type entity wasn't seen. What if it's not a local legend but a global phenomenon that shows up before disasters, adopting to different cultures? Maybe it's been here longer than we think, wearing different names. And in Minneapolis, just because there's no viral footage doesn't mean it didn't happen. People reported it, and the internet is full of forgotten forum posts and personal testimonies that never make it to CNN or even your local news. As for Fukushima, well, yeah, maybe Western researchers were the first to talk about it, but doesn't that prove the point? If we hadn't looked into the Chernobyl Blackbird, that story would have been forgotten too. Who's to say local accounts weren't buried or simply never reported upon? While Japan does not have the same history of government secrecy regarding supernatural events as the Soviet Union, there are several reasons why a story like Mothman at Fukushima might not have been widely publicized. One major factor is Japan's cultural emphasis on maintaining harmony and social order. The government was already struggling with public trust due to its handling of the Fukushima nuclear crisis, and reports of a paranormal omen of disaster might have incited unnecessary fear or further damaged confidence in the government. Japanese media has a history of downplaying what they consider hysteria-inducing topics to prevent mass panic. This was seen in the early C-19 response, and even historically in earthquake predictions, where officials have sometimes withheld information in order to avoid mass fear. Additionally, the Fukushima disaster itself was already a public relations nightmare for Japan. The government faced heavy criticism for initially downplaying the severity of the nuclear meltdown, and if there had been claims of paranormal sightings, they might have been ignored or dismissed to keep the focus on real, tangible threats such as radiation exposure, infrastructure damage, and disaster relief efforts. A Mothman-like entity appearing before the disaster would have likely been seen as a distraction rather than a serious concern. Furthermore, Japan's approach to paranormal stories differs from the West. While in Western countries, UFOs, cryptids, and supernatural events occasionally make mainstream news, in Japan, such topics are typically framed as folklore, entertainment, or personal testimonies rather than legitimate newsworthy events. If anyone had actually seen a winged humanoid near Fukushima, the reports would not have been covered by a major news outlet, but rather shared through urban legends, ghost story forums, or small local publications. Because of this, if a Mothman-like figure was seen at Fukushima, it may have simply faded into folklore rather than becoming an officially recognized mystery. Here's the thing, Doctor, we keep asking, why isn't there more proof? Instead of asking, why does this pattern keep appearing? If it was just Point Pleasant, I'd say fine, probably just a weird bird. But Chernobyl, Mexico, Minneapolis, Japan, among others, at some point, coincidence starts looking a lot like evidence by itself. And the real question isn't, why did Mothman show up in all these places? The real question may be, where is he going to show up next?
Well, the Bible don't say nothing about your little Mothman, so that should be the end of all this nonsense.
It's true the Bible doesn't specifically mention a creature exactly like Mothman, but it does describe supernatural beings that share striking similarities with the Mothman legend. We have winged entities throughout. We have beings associated with destruction and judgment. Even more, we have those that invoke fear when seen, just like the Mothman. When you comb through the Mothman descriptions, they vary wildly, but the common threads are typically the wings, humanoid structure, and scary red eyes. Some have suggested that Mothman was from another world. I'm tempted to agree with them, but not in the same sense. I don't believe for a second that Mothman was from another planet, but I'd agree that Mothman is not of this world. I think the most compelling position for this creature is one that leans towards the supernatural. Some would say,
Mothman is scary, so he must be a demon.
that'd be you, Doctor, but we shut down that line of thinking before. Even the good guys show up in the Bible and they inspire fear, which is why the first words out of their mouth is typically, don't be afraid. Am I saying that Mothman is an angel? In the same way that angels were sent to warn Lot of the impending doom that Sodom faced, was Mothman warning the people of West Virginia?
Oh, come on now. Angel means messenger. Mothman wouldn't be a really good messenger if he didn't say nothing. If he just mysteriously flies over stuff and stares at it with his little creepy red eyes.
Well, for once we agree. If he was meant to be a harbinger, a messenger warning of impending doom, did Mothman make a direct attempt at communication with anyone? Well, if you asked Mary Hyre back in the 60s, she might say yes. It was the autumn of 1966, and Point Pleasant was buzzing with fear. The Mothman sightings had begun weeks earlier, and the eerie, red-eyed creature had already been spotted by dozens of witnesses, many of whom had no logical explanation for what they saw. As the reports piled up, one person became the accidental hub of the unfolding mystery, a woman named Mary Hyre. Mary was no paranormal investigator. She was a respected journalist for the Point Pleasant Register, known for her sharp reporting and deep ties to the local community. But something strange was happening to her. As she continued to cover the bizarre sightings of Mothman, strange visions and dreams began to haunt her, dreams that felt more like warning than imagination. It's said that one night, as Mary drifted into sleep, she claims a terrifying vision took hold. She saw the Ohio River, dark and angry, rising higher and higher, swallowing the town she had called home for years. The riverbanks overflowed, cars were swept away, houses submerged, people screaming as they were pulled under the freezing current. It wasn't just a dream, it was an overwhelming, inescapable sense of doom, she says. When she awoke, her hands were shaking. She had never had a dream so vivid before. At first, she dismissed it. Perhaps it was stress from covering all the strange reports flooding her newsroom. But then the dream came again. And again, each time the water seemed to rise higher, the cries of drowning victims becoming louder. She began telling people about her dreams, warning them that something was coming, something terrible that involved the river and death. As the weeks passed, Mary's unease deepened. The Mothman sightings were increasing, but there was something bigger, something worse looming just out of sight. She could feel it. Then came the next vision. This time it wasn't just water swallowing the town, it was something specific. A bridge, twisted and broken, plunging into the river below. Mary Hyre awoke in a cold sweat.
The Silver Bridge.
She told friends and colleagues about the dream, but even she wasn't sure what to make of it. Could she really be having a premonition? Or was it just her mind trying to connect the dots between all the eerie events happening in Point Pleasant? By late 1967, Mary had gained a reputation as the go-to person for the paranormal happenings in Point Pleasant. She worked closely with a man named John Keel, a New York journalist and UFO researcher who was documenting the Mothman phenomenon. But as the weirdness escalated, Mary herself became a target. One evening, while working late at the Point Pleasant Register office, she looked up to see two men standing in the doorway. They were dressed in black suits, their skin pale and almost unnatural, their eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, even though it was nighttime. One of them spoke in a slow, robotic tone, asking questions about Mothman, her articles, and what she had seen. Then one of the men leaned in closer, almost casually picked up a pen from her desk.
What is this?
He asked. Mary, confused, replied,
Well, it's just a pen.
The man seemed utterly fascinated, turning the pen over in his hands as if he had never seen such a thing before. Then suddenly, as if something had disturbed them, the two men turned and left the office without another word. After they were gone, a cold fear settled in her chest. She wondered,
Who on earth were they? What did they want? Why did they seem not right, not quite human?
She later told Keel about the Men in Black encounter, and he confirmed that other Mothman witnesses had also reported strange visits from unsettling, pale men in black suits. Something or someone was watching. Then came the day that changed everything. It was December 15th, 1967, just before Christmas. The Silver Bridge was packed with cars. Holiday shoppers heading home, workers rushing through rush hour traffic. Without warning, a sudden vibration shook the bridge. There was a sound, a deafening metallic groan, and then, before anyone had time to react, the entire structure gave way. Steel beams snapped like twigs, and in an instant, cars, buses, and people plunged into the icy Ohio River below. 46 people lost their lives in the frigid waters that day. And Mary thought, just like that, her nightmare had come true. The bridge, the water, the deaths, everything she had seen was real. In the aftermath of the disaster, many people started to wonder, was Mothman a warning? Had the creature been trying to alert the town of the impending catastrophe? More chillingly, if Mothman had been a sign of coming doom, had it now disappeared only to appear again before another disaster? Mary Hyre was devastated. She had warned people about something coming, but no one had listened, not really. In the weeks after the Silver Bridge collapse, she continued to receive strange visitors from Men in Black, even though the Mothman sightings had largely stopped. They asked her what she knew, what she thought she had predicted, and if she planned to keep writing. But then, just a few months later, in early 1970, Mary Hyre died unexpectedly at the age of 54. Some say her heart gave out from the stress of what she had experienced, while others claim she had known too much, that she had gotten too close to something beyond human comprehension. One thing was certain. Mary Hyre was one of the few who claimed to have truly sensed what was coming, and just like the bridge she had dreamed of, she was gone. Was it Mothman sending her these warnings? Was it a divine or prophetic vision, much like those given to biblical figures prior to disasters? Or was it something even darker, something that knew the end was coming but could not stop it, or didn't want to stop it? Whatever it was, Mary Hyre says she saw what no one else could, and by the time the world understood, it was too late. Now, there's a lot to talk about here in our final stretch. I'm going to save Dr. Wright the time and say that much of this is embellishment from a new figure, not mentioned until now, but famously associated with the Mothman of Point Pleasant, the New York journalist and author, John Keel. There are no documented first-hand accounts of Mary Hyre explicitly stating she dreamed of the Silver Bridge collapse before it happened. However, Keel reported that she had ominous feelings about water-related disasters, and she told him she felt something terrible was coming. John Keel wrote that Mary mentioned dreams of drowning victims in large bodies of water. However, whether she explicitly foresaw the Silver Bridge collapse is highly debatable. as there are no newspaper records or interviews before the event to confirm this. Some local residents later claimed Mary had warned of a bridge collapse, but these accounts surfaced only after the fact. Now, Mary Hyre did report encounters with strange men in black suits, which align with John Keel's accounts. However, the specific pen incident comes from Keel's retellings and may be embellished or exaggerated. Keel himself claims to have anticipated a disaster in December of 1967, but didn't know what or where it would be. Apparently, many people reported a sense of unease at the time, and Keel says he was receiving strange phone calls and cryptic messages that some believe were supernatural warnings. Mary allegedly received more visits from the mysterious men after the bridge disaster, who warned her to stop writing about Mothman and UFOs. While these stories exist, there are no official records or direct interviews confirming these post-collapse encounters. There are no known records in existence where Mary Hyre directly connected Mothman to her dreams. It was later interpretations that linked her dreams of water with the bridge disaster. And Keel himself speculated that Mothman, the Men in Black, and other strange events were all connected, but Hyre herself did not claim that Mothman gave her any visions. Concerning Hyre's untimely demise, all records seem to indicate that she died of natural causes in February of 1970, and not under any mysterious circumstances. There is no documented evidence that she was silenced or threatened with death. However, her death did fuel speculation among theorists, especially since other Mothman witnesses also passed away within a few years. So in short, Mary Hyre's prophetic dreams were more about a sense of doom rather than any specific predictions. So did John Keel lie about all these things? Well, it's complicated. John Keel was not necessarily lying, but he was not a strict journalist in the traditional sense either. Keel was a storyteller, a theorist, and a believer in the unexplained, which means his work is a mix of truth, speculation, and interpretation. Was John Keel making it all up? The short answer, not entirely. But he did embellish, reinterpret, and sometimes make leaps of logic that weren't backed by hard evidence.
Oh, well, John Keel, he reminds me of somebody.
Shut up. Keel was a real investigator. He did travel to Point Pleasant. He interviewed locals. He collected eyewitness accounts firsthand. Yes, he did write a book about all of this. His book was published in 1975, entitled The Mothman Prophecies. It was based on the real events, but let's just say his interpretations often went beyond the facts. Many of the people he interviewed, including Mary Hyre, confirmed they had strange experiences, and we've admitted Keel was prone to embellishments. He frequently over-dramatized events, sometimes adding details that witnesses never explicitly reported. For example, his descriptions of the Men in Black encounters often sound more science fiction than witnesses originally described. Some Mothman witnesses later said their accounts were exaggerated in Keel's book. Keel was obsessed with patterns.
Who else do I know that's like that?
Shut up! Keel believed in a super spectrum, an unseen force that connects UFOs, cryptids, and supernatural events.
Oh, that sounds like...
I said shut up. I will definitely own some of that. I do believe that there is a lot that connects the UFO or UAP phenomenon with cryptids and other strange events, though we'd most likely not agree on the unseen force behind them. Keel linked events and drew conclusions that many felt were highly speculative. He tied Mothman, UFOs, Men in Black, and bridge collapses together, even though some would say there's no hard evidence connecting them. Keel claimed to have received mysterious phone calls, cryptic messages, and supernatural warnings. Some believe these were hoaxes played on him by pranksters, or perhaps his own paranoia affecting his judgment. Others think he was genuinely experiencing something strange, but his interpretations might not have been accurate. Keel certainly didn't lie about the Silver Bridge collapse, but some say he retroactively connected Mothman to the disaster in a way that witnesses had not originally done. Prior to the collapse, many people were reporting Mothman, UFOs, and weird phenomenon, but no one was saying Mothman as a warning of disaster. After the collapse, the connection between Mothman and the bridge became legendary, largely because Keel framed it in that way in the book The Mothman Prophecies. There is no evidence that Mothman directly warned anyone about the bridge collapse, only that people started making the connection after the fact. There are those that claim Keel was a fraud or a con artist. I think this is too harsh. He wasn't a con artist, but he was a storyteller first and an investigator second. He didn't make up events, but he interpreted them in ways that made them more dramatic or supernatural. He was genuinely deeply immersed in the mystery and sometimes his enthusiasm led him to make assumptions that weren't fully supported by the evidence.
Come on, Nellie. Keel was a writer, not a scientist. He wanted a best-selling book, and you can't sell books without a little creative storytelling.
Well, that's fair, Doctor, but the sightings, the men in black, the eerie premonitions, those were real. Keel didn't invent Mothman either. He just tried to explain it. Maybe he got carried away, but that doesn't mean nothing happened and that no one saw anything. Keel was a flawed but fascinating figure, and whether you see him as a truth seeker or sensationalist, he helped turn Mothman into one of the greatest paranormal legends of all time. When I joined the guys over at the Unrefined podcast last week, one of the things we discussed was the devil in the gaps. We agreed that many Christians, when we see or hear of the unknown or unexplained, many immediately attribute it to the devil or something demonic. I entertained the idea that Mothman is a supernatural entity. After all the research and storytelling of my own, this is where I'm at. Now, was he angelic or demonic? I really tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, but when God sends his holy messengers, they are direct. What good would warnings be if no one received them? Or if they did, if no one knew how to interpret them? What if Mary Heyer and John Keel both had these awful dreams and sensations of impending doom? Wouldn't it be absolutely awful to have these feelings and not be able to explain them or understand them? Or have anyone else explain them for that matter? What if Mothman is not a benevolent messenger from the throne of heaven, but a malevolent force who sought to inspire fear and dread? It pursued the couples that night, and they feared for their lives. And one of the couples said they continued to be taunted and tormented by the creature, receiving frequent visits where it would just stare with its terrifying red eyes through their windows. It seemed that it sought solely to torment, not just through its glares, but also by giving just enough information to make you think something is going to happen, but not enough for you to do anything about it. If Mothman were from God, and God wanted to warn a group of people, biblically speaking, he has sent messengers, human and divine, angels and prophets have carried his warnings, but they are clear. They contain clear warnings and clear instructions. And when they're unclear, God has elevated his servants to bring the clarity, i.e. Joseph and Daniel. Sometimes they're delivered to individuals like Eli in 1 Samuel, Lot in Genesis, or Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel. Other times they are delivered to groups of people or cities like Jonah being sent to the people of Nineveh. Now Jonah shows us something else about God. Even when the messenger doesn't want to deliver the message, God made sure it got through. In Daniel 10, when sending Gabriel to Daniel, Gabriel gets held up. God then dispatches Michael to free him so he could deliver his message to Daniel. If God wants to say something to someone, my friend, he will do so. If God wants someone to get a message, he will make sure they do. Nowhere is this clearer than in Jesus. God wrapped himself in humanity. He fully became one of us to deliver a message of hope. Destruction is what awaits every single human being because of our sin. We've all fallen. We've all lost our way. But Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." He lived the life we couldn't live, died the death we deserved to die. But then he victoriously rose from the grave. He proved he was not only a messenger, not only a savior, but God incarnate who had the authority to grant the forgiveness of sin. If Mothman is a harbinger, I feel he is a demonic one. Not solely because of the fear that he inspires, but the ambiguity with which he operates. God's messengers make themselves known and give a clear message, or interpreters are sent. This being did nothing of the sort. Yeah, in hindsight, a bunch of stuff seemed to connect, maybe, but what good did that do the people of Point Pleasant on December 15th of 1967? Now, a heavier question is, did the Mothman cause that event to occur? Or did it simply know it was going to happen and decided to scare and taunt Yahweh's image bearers dwelling in Point Pleasant? We'd have to speculate a lot more than John Keel to know the answer to that one. If Mothman is an evil demonic entity of some kind, could it cause harm like this? Well, my friends, there's no doubt in my mind that it could if that were the case. You see, evil powers can interact with the physical world. Whether it's demons entering pigs, Pharaoh's magicians creating serpents, powers and principalities can and do interact and affect our physical world. I want you to think of the Satan of Job, the spiritual being that was permitted to kill his livestock, some by Sabaean, others by calling fire from heaven upon them. The same spiritual being that was able to kill his family by calling forth great winds that caused the eldest son's home to collapse with all of Job's kids inside. I'm not trying to trivialize the deaths of 46 people in Point Pleasant. I'm merely trying to demonstrate that a powerful spiritual being caused a home to collapse on Job's family, killing his 7 sons and 3 daughters. Could a similar being have caused the eye bar to snap and for a bridge to collapse that cold December night? I think the answer is yes. But do we know if that's what happened? Well, no, we don't know that for sure. In Luke 13, Jesus refers to the collapse of another structure, the Tower of Siloam, that took the lives of 18 people. And the context seems to suggest that this was just a tragedy, but not a supernatural one. We know how the bridge collapsed, practically speaking. A single eye bar, a crucial piece of steel that held the bridge together, suddenly snapped. A hairline crack had been lurking inside the eye bar for years on a bridge that was out of date. It could have been gravity or a demon that pulled down the bridge, but we have no way to say that with certainty. Perhaps none of it is connected. A tragedy could have simply occurred during a very strange time in Point Pleasant. 2 things can be true simultaneously and separately. Mothman did trouble the people of Point Pleasant in the 1960s. And a broken, outdated bridge also collapsed in the 1960s. No matter if you feel these events are related or isolated, the fact remains that Mothman lives on in legend, lore, and imagination to this very day. Those a little more familiar with the lore of Mothman still may be thinking to yourself, he didn't even talk about all the UFO stuff. He didn't even mention the mysterious figure known as Indrid Cold. You're right, I didn't. Because I'm saving some stuff for later. I gotta save some stuff. I'm saving that for season 3 when we begin to discuss aliens, UFOs or UAPs, and all kinds of other creepy, crazy stuff. I'll show my hand a little bit and point out the super spectrum that I see. There are many places that have extreme paranormal activity, accompanied by strange lights in the sky and other high strangeness. But like I said, I'm not going anywhere, and I hope you're not either. The Dancing Toaster is only getting started, my friends, but this episode must sadly come to an end. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive of the Mothman of Point Pleasant. There is more to the story, but I'm in no rush. I want to thank you for joining me yet again. Don't forget about the new show coming in about 3 weeks' time. The Man-Eating Toaster will be exclusively available for those that support the Dancing Toaster via Patreon. It's $5 a month to formally become one of my toasties. Please consider signing up for that if you've enjoyed or been blessed by the work I'm doing here. If you can't commit monthly, you can head over to buymeacoffee.com and send a few coins my way if you feel so led. One other thing you can do for me, folks, is head over to the YouTube channel. Even if you enjoy on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, consider subscribing to the channel so we can let more people know about the Dancing Toaster and what we're doing. I'm prayerfully considering some additional content on the YouTube channel to increase awareness. If you follow me on Instagram and Facebook, you already knew what this week's topic was about. If you want to know what we're covering next week, well, you need to head over to Instagram or Facebook so you can stay up to date. One strange thank you goes out to our first guest, Dr. I'll Be Right.
I think you're nuts, but I'm glad you're finally giving me a platform.
Clearly, I wanted to try something a little different this week. Hopefully you didn't hate it. I had a ton of fun with the doctor, and I hope you did too. Let me know your thoughts so I can decide if Dr. Wright will be making a return or if he's going to be relegated back to mere heckler status. Let me know what you think, all kidding aside. Thank you for hanging out with me. Thank you for listening. I really want the show to be something people enjoy each week, and it means so much to me that this seems to be the case, at least for now, so that others can share in our joy and get in on the fun. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, leave me a review, do all the things wherever you consume the Dancing Toaster. But whatever you do, don't consume toasters, and don't let the Mothman consume you. I love you. I'm out.
Report suspicious activities and call 911 for immediate response. Expect delay.
Company Ellis will be taking in from the south. Stand by. Flight 022. Maintain approach. You're clear for movement.
Expect traffic delay and restrictions. Take personal security precautions to avoid becoming a victim of an attack. Avoid crowded public areas and gatherings. Not travel in areas affected by the attack or in a known area elevated virus activity. Keep emergency supplies accessible and a full tank of gas at all times.
Be careful.
Government officials insist the